I'm going to call this joint meeting of the Lake Forest Park Tree Board and the Climate Action Committee into being. So this is, thank you all for being here. First of all, it's not our usual time to meet. I don't know if the Climate Action Committee meets at 6:30. I think you meet at 7 too usually. 7. So anyway, appreciate it. We do have, so there's some, we'll get into agenda in a minute, but there's there are two major items that we wanted, that both groups need to know about. And there are major items on the agenda tonight. But there's also, I think, a good reason for us having a joint meeting, just because, oh, there you are. Good to see you. So we can get to know each other and what more or less allied groups are doing. Anyway, good. So I'm glad you're here. It's an opportunity to do those kinds of things. I know it's on the other side of it's a little bit of an inconvenience, I think, at least for the tree board. In a sense, we were hoping to have a regular meeting along about now, but we can deal with that. So we're going to start with introductions, and yet we got a fairly full agenda tonight, and a number of things we want to do. So but it would be worth introducing ourselves, because a lot of us don't know each other. So your name and something, just any other thing you'd like us to know about you. I'm Mark Phillips. I'm the chair of the tree board, and I'm going to be on Saturday. I'm putting up banners around the city for the Secret Garden Tour that's coming up on June the 14th. So you'll see banners after Saturday, and you'll remember that I had a hand in putting them. Okay.
I'm Linda Holman. I'm a member of the Climate Action Committee. I'm Ann Udeloy. I'm vice chair of Climate Action Committee.
Richard Saunders on the tree board.
I'm Drew Epping, the urban forest planner for the city.
My name's Elizabeth, the assistant planner at the city of Lake Forest Park.
And in the back over there.
Oh, I'm Tracy Rotan, on the council liaison to the Climate Action Committee.
I'm Mimi Bertram from the Climate Action Committee. I'm climate all the time, 24 hours a day.
Excellent. Go ahead, Doug.
What's Bruegel, tree board?
Casey Spain, tree board.
Larry Goldman, council liaison to the tree board.
Victoria Pitas, vice chair of the tree board.
Dick Homestead, tree board, retired UW faculty, as is Doug.
As Sarah Phillips, I painted a mural on Saturday, which I'm going to show you. Oh.
And do we have people online?
That'd be good.
Mark Hoffman is the only one online.
I saw Mark and I saw, oh yeah.
And there's somebody in the attendance.
That's me.
Oh.
Mark, are you tracking us?
Officially, yes, but realistically, I'm multitasking, but I'm here.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
Community Development Director, City of Lake Forest Park.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll take a look at the agenda. It did come out, and I think you've all had a chance to, or at least may well have seen it. It's a little bit of an awkward agenda. Showing that we do have these two major items that we're gonna talk about: the climate element draft policies and the public benefit rating system. But then each of the two groups has some light business to do. 12 items altogether that we would like to work through.
In a minute apiece.
About a minute apiece. Yeah, exactly. So we were thinking originally, well, maybe we could structure this in such a way that half the group could go home at a certain time and the other half could stay. And we kind of thought about that and decided, well, it's not going to be too painful and it'll move quickly, I think. And it's good to know what other people are doing, because the Climate Action Committee is doing some interesting things, and so is the tree board. So anyway, you've seen the agenda. You know that this special meeting, we're not able to do any modifications, but still, I think it would be good to approve this agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, very good. I don't see any member of the public here.
We had another person join.
Matt joined, yeah.
That is
Yeah, I'm on the climate committee, not public.
Oh, okay, very good. All right, great. So, not seeing any member of the public who may wish to make comments, I think we'll move right ahead into the new business section of this meeting. And that's where I'm gonna turn it over to, the first item on the agenda is our chance to review, the draft elements that have been developed for the climate element, the climate section of the comprehensive plan. So, you want to take that, Sarah?
Yes. I'm gonna tell you stuff you already know, so just bear with me. In 2023, the state legislature required that cities, they amended the requirements for the comprehensive plan and required that cities include a climate element in their comprehensive plan. And they gave the cities, all of the cities, not every city, but the cities who do comprehensive plan had to have the climate element. So typically what happens is that you do a climate element and then you do a climate action plan. But we did that backwards. We did the climate action plan first, and now we're looking at the climate element. But we were in a sort of an enviable position, which was that the city received a very large grant to help us develop this climate element. And that was the sort of the good news. It's through the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce has their own timeline, which is unrelated to sort of anything else. And they require a draft of the document to be done, to be submitted to them in June. That's what you have in front of you, is the draft document that's going to Commerce in this month. There'll be, I think, 1 or 2 more steps within the city before it actually goes there. But that doesn't, it's a draft document, it's not the final document. And when it comes back, we get a couple more opportunities to make public comment and to alter the document from what the public says, it will go to the planning commission. The planning commission will do their magic to it, and then they will take it to the council. The council will have a public hearing. There'll be an open comment period before that, then it will be submitted to the council. There'll be hearings. So there'll be a number of times in which we have an opportunity to touch this document. So, so I just wanted you to sort of understand why there's an urgency in getting it forward, and then we get it back, and then we get to touch it again. So it's complex, but it's a funding requirement. And so our objective today is really just to familiarize these 2 committees with the big picture of what the draft climate element is. And it is divided into 2 parts. One is sort of what are the policies, the goals and policies, and then a second part, which is what is the process. And we're going to talk about that backwards. We're going to talk first about the process, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the goals. And this is going to be sort of when we're looking at the goals, we're just going to look at them together. We're going to sort of talk about clarity. We're not going to get into the details, but it just gives you a sense of where this document is going. So the tree people. We met as a new committee. What we call it's climate policy action team. Advisory
Climate policy
Yeah,
advisory team.
And that was made up of members from the planning commission, from the tree board, and from other climate action committee.
Can we see who all worked on that? I know Victoria and Stacy did. And okay.
So the notion was to bring people together who had some interest in this as it began to evolve. So I think it was a very interesting team. We had our last meeting last night. No party, no wine, no nothing. Just stopped. But I just want to say this is a high level kind of thing that we're doing, and I give it to my colleagues from the tree.
Awesome.
we didn't plan a like formal presentation for this. So our goal is to just orient to, we're starting with the volume 2 in the draft. Is it possible to pull it up?
I have it.
Is that a thing that we could allow Sarah to screen share or something? How do you want to do it? Do you have talking points you want to walk through? Do you want to just go section by section?
I'm thinking that it might be better section by section.
Okay.
It was summarizes too briefly.
That works?
Yeah.
So,
You would start, I'm happy to.
Right, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe this is where you started. So the draft with commerce and then the update that's going to council. Are the goals the same with those? In other words, is it still targeted at the comp plan update, the draft that's going to commerce?
Yes. Yes,
do
you want-
Is this a federal Department of Commerce or the state? No.
State.
State.
say, you want this?
Either way, either I can have you scroll or I can take it. It's up to you. So yeah, my understanding is that the goal is that this is when it goes to commerce, like 98% what will be presented to the council at the end of the year, but opportunities for the refinement. So the bones of this, I believe, are kind of set on what's going at the end.
Sorry, wait.
So section 2, volume 2 goes through kind of the background of what is this, why was it created, and how did it come to be. We are not going to read the whole thing together, but just as an orientation to it, there are two sub elements that are key to in the goals section. You'll see 2 portions. One is the resilience sub element and the other is the greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub element. So each of them have multiple sections of policy goals that are tied to them, but those are the kind of 2 buckets they fall into.
And we've already given feedback that we should swap the order of those.
Yes.
Greenhouse first and then the resilience.
There, the context of how this was developed, you can actually go to the next page, I think. Is they started by looking at what do we already have. So like Sarah said, we did some things a little backwards, and according to the consultants that we worked with, Lake Forest Park had significantly more things kind of already on the books related to this than a lot of other cities that they've worked with. So some of what they were looking at, or the documents they were looking at, is in this section. And some of them are very new, like the climate action plan. Some of them are a little older and need some updating potentially, but that's where they started at looking at just what's our baseline for climate policy and direction and vision for the city. Anything else on that section? You can keep going.
No, I think.
And then there's kind of summaries of what they looked at in each of those, or a couple of the key ones. But you know, if people have specific questions about what they were looking at in those, so do you want to talk public participation?
Yeah. The climate element was developed collaboratively with a community-based climate planning advisory team, which you know, ECOT. It also included collaboratively additionally with staff, youth, and some of the public through various engagement initiatives. The initiatives included an online community survey to gauge the understanding of the climate change and policy areas, some group interviews with youth, specifically the Environmental Club and the Interact Club at Shorecrest High School. And there was also a community open house. So this process was pretty inclusive and ensured that some of the actionable policies reflected community needs and priorities.
And one of the point two in there is also a webpage. So if you would like more context, any of the documents that were referenced, et cetera, any of the work that was done up until this point is all linked on the website, on the city webpage. And then what's next?
The next
6, 7, 8.
header.
I think Sarah's pretty much covered 6, 7, 8 in that. For there'll be public comment period, planning commission review, review by our boards and feedback given. And then at the end of all of it, it'll go to council.
So we're encouraging people to, show up at those places and I think the committees themselves could submit comments if your whole committee wanted them.
And what
You're
we,
not looking for comments tonight, you're.
what we talked to Mark about last night was tonight is about orienting everybody, answering basic questions, and then folks can chew on it. And we'll revisit at our separate meetings in July, and he said probably even into August. To provide more, like, if you want to dig into why is it worded this way kind of feedback. You can do that either individually, I'll just volunteer, send comments like that to Mark, or if we want to talk about it as a board, we can do that at our future meetings. Mark, did you have something? I see you're off mute.
Yeah, no, just in case you had a question, that's perfect. Thank you for the background. The key of the climate policy advisory team was that as a group, when they have achieved a draft or actionable document, which was last night, that the corresponding members would go back to their boards and commissions, committees, et cetera, and begin the conversation about amending, clarifying, making it more readable, understanding. We're also going to do the major component of public comment. There will be a tool or website where citizens, residents, visitors, anyone concerned can go to see the draft document and put their comments directly into that. That will be available mid-June through July. So this June, July period starting tonight is meant for that review, awareness, and comment. At some point will be before Planning Commission. They are required to hold a public hearing, make a formal recommendation to the city council, similar to what we did with the comprehensive plan last year. And we've reserved the fall for an official public hearing, review, discussion, and action by the city council in 2025. Commerce's fiscal year ends at the end of June. The Cascadia contract runs through the end of the year. And so that's why there's a sort of a mismatch on timing. We are going to work on the next 2 weeks, sending the deliverables to Commerce and getting reimbursed. That will close the Commerce grant portion. And in the end, November, December, when the city acts, it will go back to Commerce for their final 60-day review just prior to adoption. So they're just kind of switching gears. The deliverable is an actionable draft document, and that was achieved last night. It's slightly different than what you have here. When I get that from Cascadia to send to Commerce, I will share it with every board and commission. Essentially, it's this plus the wordsmithing that was done until 9 p.m. last night. So we'll catch up via email. Thank you.
What was that? I can keep going. So next section is an overview of the things that have been identified as the most likely impacts of climate change specific to Lake Forest Park. So rising temperatures and extreme heat, wildfires and smoke, changing precipitation and flooding, and drought and water supply. So you've got short descriptions of how that's anticipated to impact our city, each of those. And those are all based on a series of analyses that the Cascadia group did throughout their process. So those are, we also in like the survey and in public feedback they've been asking questions about what impacts are you already seeing, what impacts are you most concerned about. And so this is a combination of what are we already smoke we are already experiencing, what is happening here, how many folks are concerned about that continuing to get worse, and their expert analysis of what is most likely. Any questions? at This point?
And this kind of, there was nothing that was in the climate action plan that didn't sort of match this.
The next section specifically goes over vulnerability assessments. So they did vulnerability assessments for both community vulnerability, how are citizens going to be impacted, and our infrastructure. So where are the places that we have critical facilities or water resources or other things like that that will be potentially impacted or significantly impacted by those things identified above. So precipitation and flooding has high chance of impacting our water resource infrastructure. So what can we do to have more robust, pardon me, plans in place to protect those pieces of infrastructure?
Quick question.
Yep.
Is city center the same as town center?
Yes.
And is it correct to use both of them? I mean, is one or the other better, or have a different meaning, or?
It's all it's capitals, meaning that it's a proper noun of some sort, right?
I guess town center is a shopping center. So this is. Are we
Yeah.
in town center now?
You
Yeah.
planning people, are you in the zoning, town center zoning? Town center zone.
Any other questions? You want to do greenhouse gas?
We scroll. Sorry.
Down. If you want to.
Done with this section, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay.
The next section is a sub-element, the greenhouse gas emissions in Forest Park. And it goes over sort of an emissions overview here and discusses the primary cause and dominant source. So climate change is, you'll read here that climate change is primarily caused by the burning of the fossil fuels. And in Lake Forest Park, transportation is the most significant source of the GHG emissions. It contributes 61% of community-wide. I sort of summarized those in my notes. 61% of the community-wide emissions in 2023, followed by the buildings and energy at 29%. The municipal vehicle fleet alone accounted for 71% of municipal GHG emissions in 2023. So you can read all of that here. That's just a very quick overview. And then from there were some transportation insights as well. That's scroll.
Oh.
Yeah, there we go.
Here.
Yeah, I think so. The majority of the trips, this is interesting, in Lake Forest Park, over 85% were interjurisdictional. So they either start or end in Lake Forest Park and involve a neighboring city. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Awesome. Non-work trips by residents are the most frequent type and the top contributor to overall vehicle miles traveled. So,
I recall hearing at some point that. It's the sort of at the state level, most of the greenhouse gas emissions. Allocated like Lake Forest Park is people flying in and out of the airport, is that correct, or is that?
Yeah, so can you go up
Should
one
that be
page to
mentioned
the bar graph?
more deliberately, I guess.
That is one of the comments that's been made and recommendations for potentially giving more context to this graph specifically. So this breaks down transportation, buildings, refrigerant, solid waste, land use. But you're correct that a significant portion of that transportation is air travel through SeaTac that is allocated by population and median income, I think, to each city. And based on traveler data of how many people say they are traveling from within King County, or live within King County. So significant chunk of that is aggregated data that may or may not be super accurate to our specific residents and is not something we have a ton of control over. And one of the recommendations that I believe you had made in the comments was potentially putting something in here that specifies what in this chart is stuff that is specific data to the city and is like actually measured and tracked specific to Lake Forest Park, and what is based on assumptions or calculations either at the regional, state, or some of it is like national stats.
Yeah,
So
it's differentiating what we have control over.
Yeah.
And can actually manage.
Yeah.
Against. The numbers will be what the numbers are, but it's good to know what we can actually influence locally.
There might be like a number for discretionary, let's say,
and
something, we really have no control except by losing population. The airport thing.
Well, it's more of an overarching, if all the airlines have more efficient airplanes. Or if air traffic decreases on a broad basis, then we will receive the benefits of those deductions also. But it's done at a global level and not nobody's measuring how many flights are actually attributed to people from Lake Forest Park or where we are flying to.
Yeah.
That's too granular. It can't be, not only can it not be acquired, but I think we'd all be creeped out if it were. So.
Yeah. And there is significantly more information and context about that in the other materials available on the website and the previous presentations. This packet is kind of high enough level that the details of that are not included in it. But it is part of what the conversation was in getting from this chart to the recommendations of what policy goals should be.
But you did say, Victoria, I think that an estimate
We did
of that air
recommend that they
travel
put a
factor
little bit
is in
more
that green
detail.
part of the bars, right?
The green part includes SeaTac air travel, yeah.
We did ask them to break out SeaTac air travel. What part of that is air and what part of it is everything else?
Yeah.
Um,
So that may be an edit that comes to this document before it is.
Is there mass transit, bus and light rail stuff also that's proportioned out and into this?
It is in the transportation section.
That was just the.
Yeah. Lots of interesting things. I find lots of interesting stuff on that next page that Stacy summarized the bullet points about what our vehicle travel in the city is. Just has some. That is one page of this that I would recommend going back to visit if you're thinking about what travel looks like in Lake Forest Park. This has some great takeaways that you can dig into.
It's the last mile issue, you gotta pick up your kid at school, you're going to short faster.
We also have a large portion of folks who drive through Lake Forest Park or either start or end their trip in Lake Forest Park, but travel beyond the city as part of that case. So some interesting complexities to it.
Sorry, if somebody drives through Lake Forest Park, just pieces through on Buffalo Way, does that count as Lake Forest Park emissions? Is that how?
Trying to remember what portions of the analysis, I believe that was included in some portion of it, but it's been long enough since that presentation that I can't answer you off the top of my head.
Well, I mean, if somebody drives through, somebody going from Kenmore to Seattle, they drive through here, many greenhouse gases.
It's
Is that
called
considered
the,
an LFP?
yeah, it's
emission?
called the interjurisdictional commute. And they're usually between 3 and 18 miles.
Doesn't it have to start or end in like yes?
For that one,
The left bullet there, work trips contribute disproportionately. The bulk of PMT from work trips comes from interjurisdictional trips between 3 and 18 miles. Their longer interjurisdictional commutes significantly increase our total en route emissions footprint. So basically, that's a picture of the cars that are going through the city.
Okay, would you say trips either start or end Lake Forest Park? What about just sort of through?
No.
Which I guess
Normally,
is-
for this type of an analysis where you're trying to figure out what the emissions related to a city are. You actually exclude anybody who's just, if they
Pass
start in
through traffic.
Kirkland and they're driving to Edmonds, that doesn't
That
count.
gets excluded.
Yeah.
That's excluded because
We have no control of that at all.
Yeah, it's accounted in a different level of climate planning. For the city level, what we're looking at is anything that starts or ends in Lake Forest Park, because that's people coming into the city or going out, going to work, returning to what have you. But, you know, somebody's on a truck on 522 and they're just going from, you know, Woodinville to Seattle, that's not attributed to our emissions.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, Tracy, just jump in.
Then, okay, I love your definition, both yours, and what are the other 15% then? If we're only counting the things that start and end here, why wouldn't it be 100% of what we look at?
I'm sorry, what do you,
So that figure, over
Yeah.
85% of all vehicles are jurisdictional. Does that mean that?
The other 15% is within Lake Forest Park,
So
it
the other-
doesn't cross into another.
the other 15% are me driving to this meeting
Correct.
and then driving home. Yeah.
I walk.
Once we improve the sidewalks, I will too.
So yeah, some
Don't
other.
rush, don't rush on my account.
You and your walker.
Yeah. By the time that happens, I'll need a squat space in my wheelchair.
Anything else on transportation? Like I said, some interesting stuff in this that we can dig into in our future meetings if folks reach the right time for questions. Then contributions of state and federal policies. So just acknowledging that, like we said earlier, there's a lot of this that it's not going to be impacted by LFP city policy. So they also looked at, in looking at the kind of wedge analysis of what trajectory are we on? What do current policies, what are they anticipated to change? And where do we need to get with other policies that have not been put in place yet? They factored in state and federal, what's already on the books and what impact will that have to get us and get us how far towards the goals that we are trying to achieve. So more information there about what those policies are.
With those policies change,
Everything changes, doesn't it?
well, how do you factor, I like, is that just gonna be updated as time goes on?
It's a good question.
Well, for the purpose of this document, we have a starting point, which is what the regulations are today. And undoubtedly, the regulations will change and that will be captured in 5-year updates. Sadly.
So 5-year updates to the comp plan.
Comp plan.
So the next time the entire comp plan is updated, this element, which will be a part of the comp plan at that time, will also be updated. And it will not be on its own separate schedule, it will just be considered, so it will be on the books for a little
So in
shorter
4
time.
years.
Yep,
Oh, I was thinking it was 10 years. Okay.
I think it's a 5-year. I think it's 10. Am I incorrect in that?
I think it's 10.
And maybe 10.
I think
Yeah,
it used to
what I've
be.
seen. I thought it was 5 too, but I think it's longer period.
So these numbers could change quite a bit. And what
The
goes
states maybe not, but the federal might.
Well, and
You
even
know,
the states could change too, you know.
Is the cafe regulations the only federal policy that's a resource or background? It seems like there's a lot of other stuff that the federal government used to do anyway.
yeah, the federal government's the starting point for things like the hydrofluorocarbon policy.
So there's
Then the
funding, for
state-
example,
So
that-
with a lot of these policies, the federal government sets a standard and states cannot be beyond that standard. But they can choose to regulate at a tighter level than that standard. And the states have a choice as to whether they adopt state level standards or just rely on the federal standards. So,
okay, and so it's policy, it's not really
Yeah.
getting at funding as a resource. Federal funding sources or state funding sources.
No, that's not
That'd be
part of
another list somewhere.
We're sort of asking the question, here's the pie of emissions reductions. And which ones of those are gonna be taken care of by somebody outside of Lake Forest Park? So how many, will the cafe standards reduce emissions? And we get credit for that. I mean, we don't get credit, but the world gets credit of the reductions that come through increased cafe standards. And we're not responsible for that, but it is a picture of how we have to reduce all of the emissions, ours. And then the county will reduce some through getting better buses and whatever.
But if the county doesn't do it, I don't, the government doesn't do that, then it's
That's
maybe
part-
on our, us more.
That's a part of the issue with doing the projections. Again, we're trying to hit certain goals by 2050. And right now, the trajectory towards those goals assumes, for example, that vehicle cafe standards will at least remain at
Be
their
perfectly
current level.
applied all the way till the end of the graph at current standards,
At
yeah.
current standards, and they won't be loosened. If anything, they would be tightened. If anything, you would get more miles per traveled per carbon emission, megaton of carbon emission, but if that changes in either direction, those changes will be reflected when we look at our projections at our next review period.
Yeah.
Or as they say, your mileage may vary.
Contents will settle it.
It was full when we packaged it.
Well, then that argues maybe for like, more frequent comp plan reassessment. Because I think this is pretty important that we stay on top of these kinds of things. And if
Well,
your
golden-
comp plan
Sorry.
climate is not up to speed, to wait 5 years for it to come up to speed seems like something that we would want.
To clarify the timeline, my understanding is that the wholesale overhaul of the comp plan is every 10 years. But at the halfway point, there's an implementation report where the city demonstrates what have we done to fulfill the comp plan. So in 2029, we have an implementation report about what we've done to go with something, to meet some of these goals for climate or housing or environment or what have you.
And then that would also reassess like what needs to be done as well as what we have done,
Yeah,
what
presumably-
more we have to do.
Yeah, presumably you would include making sure that we have accurate numbers, so we know what targets we're trying to.
Good, thank you for that clarification. Is there more?
That's the end of volume 2.
So we're gonna start with volume 1 now. It's important to say that the city council of Lake Forest Park has made a commitment to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. It's a very, and then they have over up to 20, then they have 75% by another target. There's a very ambitious goal, and those are goals that have been created countywide, where cities have said, this is what they want to do. I wouldn't bet my house on it, but they've made a commitment. I think our job is to remind them that they've made that commitment and need to move forward with it. But it's a piece of what these are up to do. So this section is really is the goals and policies. And there are 2 sections here, and we think they're in the wrong order. We think that the second one should come first, but we're going to start with the first one because otherwise that's just too good. But this has to do with resiliency, and the notion that the Climate Action Committee said was that there were essentially 3 things they wanted to do. They want to reduce emissions, maintain the environment, and develop a resilient community. These are the policies kind of behind that. And what I'm gonna do is read just the goals out loud, and we'll have a conversation on those. Underneath
Finish.
Underneath those are a series of policies, and in this one you can see there's a policy and then there's a definition, and sometimes those definitions are called out. We've asked them to call out a few more. And so the policies are a level of specificity, but they're not action. They are intentions. They are what we are moving forward. If you want to know the actions, you got to go to a climate action plan. That's it. Do this.
This is the umbrella that gives us the directive to carry out the things in the action plan.
So it's, in one sense, it's, we're all wanting to do things kind of people, but
This copy doesn't include, but I believe on the website in one of the previous presentations, you can see which of these, a number of these are pulled from the existing comp plan. Quite a bit of this is not new, it is just condensed into a single place. So that is one of the things that as you're looking through them, between now and the next meetings, may be an interesting data point to look at in that previous presentation as well.
Okay, so the first one was, the first goal is smoke and heat resilience. And the goal there is to enhance community resilience to wildfire, smoke, extreme heat by strengthening infrastructure, public and emergency services, and natural areas to reduce impacts on residents, workers, and critical services. So we all experience that smoke stuff. The question was, how do we take care of our citizens in that, when those kinds of things, and the policies are very specifically lined up to say, our intention is that. That makes sense?
Question about that though,
Yes.
the last time we had a smoke disaster, in the middle of COVID, and lots of things you'd like to have done. Probably weren't really very realistic. Is there any thought of having, we have warming centers in the winter when it gets too cold. Any thought of there being fresh air centers?
Yes, we have, they're laid out in here, cooling centers and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Air rest, as it were,
Air rest, okay, yeah, fresh air is different. Cool.
places to retreat to.
Beautiful.
So to what extent?
CE
does
1.3
the
is where you're
action
seeing.
plans detail. Specified details, so for instance, one of my pet peeves here is about. The heat island effect and the impact of. This huge parking lot here in the center of our city. That should be shaded, and it, you know, at the sacrifice of a modest number of parking places, you could have trees that would shade a significant portion of them. Does the planning go into details like that?
We don't say take 2 parking lots, plant trees, but we do raise the issue of planting, of heat islands. I'd have to go back and look at the specifics. We did look at those issues, yes.
And that's why you really need to have a manager in the government to like figure out exactly the specific things. Which parking places are gonna get taken.
It would seem like a policy though could mention, the town center.
Yeah, exactly.
Area.
Yeah,
Like,
I
you'll
look for any
see-
specific reference to that, and there's not, and it's the elephant in the room as far as cooling or heating areas.
In
concerned.
2.2, there's one that specifically talks about monitoring our urban forestry's climate impacts, focusing on high risk and underserved areas, protecting heritage trees, expanding canopy coverage, and partnering with for heat mapping. That one needs some wordsmithing, is one of the feedback pieces we gave yesterday, that it needs some more definitions of what they mean by that. But there are some places like that you'll see throughout here that kind of comes up as, we need to be paying attention to this and figuring out policies that will address it.
One of the things that the climate, the Department of Commerce requires is this notion of environmental justice and highlight to it. So that's a piece of this section. The second goal is advance environmental justice, community well-being by prioritizing equitable climate policies, inclusive decision-making, and access to healthy and resilient environment for all residents.
So what does all residents only refer to humans?
Yes. But we could. So like wildlife.
They suffer from smoking.
There's a lot of references in here I've noticed to habitat. And going hand in hand with climate degradation is habitat degradation, so.
Yeah, I don't
In that
remember
sense.
anything about smoke, like specifically about smoke or heat and
Oh.
our wildlife or that, so.
Okay, I'm writing that down. I think that's an interesting question.
It comes up in flooding and
All
Other
sorts
areas
of
of
things
maybe-
like, yeah.
but probably applies to heat too.
At risk of sounding like a broken record, I did spend some time with Google Earth. Looking at where are the big heat sink places in Lake Forest Park, and the big one here is the town center. But parking areas near our elementary schools and middle schools are other ones, so I think. if a plan were to be developed, it would say any parking lot over a certain number of spaces must have a certain amount of tree cover.
Now you're doing policy, you're not doing comprehensive plan work.
Yeah.
You're doing
Okay.
whatever the next step is.
Well,
Because
that's a
it doesn't-
generalization, though, if you have something
Because-
that says a parking lot greater than.
Yeah.
So I think the comprehensive plan has policies like that. They go into specific, they talk about town center, they talk about specific areas of the city that you could do something. No, I wouldn't rule it out as a, if it's important, I think you can.
There also is, the planning code does have specifics around parking lot requirements, like how many stalls, but then also the landscaping requirements for that. But the problem is you don't look at that unless someone's developing. So long-term established places, if they're not doing new development, are just not gonna be held to the red standard at the time. So that's kind of a.
So I mean, they should be held.
Right, I mean, I'm just looking forward, we need to develop plans that implement climate actions on existing
And
land use too.
we did make some recommendations in the building section about not just new, but renovations.
Yes.
So I think that's exactly right. And this, yeah, thank you. And then drought and flood resistance is our third goal. And it's preserve and protect Lake Forest Park water resources by advancing drought and flood resiliency. And, you know, we have a very complex water system here for water districts, and these are the policies, sort of, we were talking about trying to integrate those four, so they work collaboratively. And the scouring that happens in our streams, floods. And creating landslides. The next one was emergency management, strengthen emergency response systems to climate hazards by improving coordination, infrastructure, and community preparedness. This again has to do with heat, drought, those four categories that we talked about as are the risks. The emergency management in terms of.
And yeah, we did discuss how this has increased urgency at a time when federal systems may be managed very differently than they have previously in our lifetimes. We may need to take a careful look at this and prioritize it, not just for the climate element components, but just for a general resiliency as a community consideration.
And have it be proactive rather than just an emergency response.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's both about the coordinating the response, but also community preparedness measures and how are we. In here, you'll see some of the climate justice pieces also come up. How are we making sure that all residents, including those who may be more disconnected from services or other things in the city, are aware of what resources are available to them before the resource becomes necessary in an emergency.
Yeah. So that people know, if, for instance, if there is a power outage that lasts for 4 days. And where do you go to get information? How is information planning get to you? How do we manage those situations? Because although we'd like to think that, boy, a 4-day power outage is really unusual, we're entering unusual days.
The comprehensive emergency management plan, is that a city document or is that a NEMCO plan? I'm not familiar with that.
Is it a comprehensive waste management plan?
No,
The last
Last
part of
year.
that item, the comprehensive emergency management plan, which we should align with. I don't think it's a city document, so maybe it's.
What's it? I thought the city.
NEMCO.
have their own, and
It's a city document, and Kevin Lowry of NEMCO is starting the update on that.
I see.
I can't see this whole thing, is the cooling centers part of this?
Yes.
Sort of our attention.
I think the cooling centers are up here.
I think they're in
I think we already
the
have them.
heat and smoke section, not in the management section.
But it's really an emergency issue, so you could, maybe it belongs here instead of there, it's the first time I've seen it, the need for a cooling center would be in case of an emergency.
Well, actually, here's the funny thing, your need for a cooling center depends on you. So, what is a heat emergency? For instance, with my dad, he had about a 4-degree temperature window that we had to maintain for his health. That's not, I don't have that window. So he's in a heat emergency way before I am.
Right.
So we did have it here under smoke and heat resilience. But there were a lot of times where we had heat emergencies for him, where the rest of the community was going on unfazed and people were just having a lovely summer day. So I do see your point. It is when there is an emergency, when there is a
Community scale emergency.
yeah, community scale emergency where people are actually dying by the hundreds. Yeah, but for specific individuals, their threshold for hitting that state may be very different than the community at large.
But aren't there some, I can't remember it happening, but aren't there times when the city sort of, well, no, when the state or the county declares we have emergency conditions
Yes.
for air, certainly for air quality, they say, it's unhealthy to breathe, and
Yeah.
that's not individualized, that's, if air quality is worse than 250, everybody should either stay inside.
Yep.
Because you're sick, die.
Yeah.
So, I mean. So that way the cooling centers would be triggered by,
Yeah, I think there have to be a lot of different levels at which these centers come into play. And that we probably will have them operational and available, depending on how we write our emergency management plan. It would be reasonable to have them available and operational even before the community as a whole had a need for them. But that's a part of the emergency planning protocol.
I'm gonna move on. This section, there are two sections. That first one was about resiliency. This one is about greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So how do we reduce what's causing the greenhouse gases? And the first one is buildings and energy, and reduce emissions from buildings by supporting low carbon building energy sources and energy efficient building designs and retrofits. Sorry, basic stuff, right? Fix your buildings.
So proactive stuff like motor, home, solar and things like that.
That's in the climate action plan, yes. We've taken out, we've done some series of outreach that in a different category, but yes.
We also,
And this has the umbrella thing above that of supporting clean energy in retrofits, and I think we asked to put in language of also in new build.
and policy, there's a specific policy in here that discusses solar, and we had them add things like home heat pumps. As another example of something that we want to encourage, because solar arrays do reduce your greenhouse gas. But in many cases, heat pumps are the way to get you off of a more high carbon fuel, like in my case, a home heating oil tank to Seattle City Light electricity. That's really reducing my carbon footprint. The solar arrays reducing my bill.
Is that this document or that's the climate action?
No, there are policies in here that refer to those steps. And they're under goal CE5, buildings and energy. That's where we're encouraging those policies.
And
And
the
those are
umbrella
also in the-
directives that
exactly.
will authorize the actions, the more specific actions.
Which will eventually show up in our code, hopefully.
So you don't have anything in here, this draft form of policy away from natural gas.
We
Your
are not
policy, your
allowed
strategy was
a
to,
lawsuit related to the initiative that's currently in the courts is decided. The language is very carefully focused on
cleaner
We
energy.
can
cleaner
encourage-
energy.
Yeah.
We can
Clean
encourage
energy.
clean energy, but cannot discourage
Right.
natural gas.
So currently, we are encouraging clean energy use. Which does not mean a small modular nuclear reactor in your home.
The next goal is alternatives to driving, and we said we want to promote and enhance alternatives to single occupancy vehicle. So. Talk about mobility hubs, how to use them most effectively. This is all sort of stuff that we've collaborate with Kenmore and Shoreline, basic stuff that we talked about.
Is that sidewalks and stuff?
Mhm. Safe routes to school.
Just the schools.
Yeah, well, starting with schools. The next is electric vehicles, facilitate a just transition to electric vehicles by expanding expanding charging and education. So we think that's a critical piece.
Why just, I think it's just, does that refer to environmental justice kind of issues?
It's some code word that is important to the Department of Commerce.
That has to be done in a just manner.
It's
That might
I
be.
believe there are a number of labor unions that collaborated to promote the concept of a just transition from fossil energy. High carbon energy to low carbon energy, and the language adopted by those groups included the phrase just transition. And so you will see the phrase just transition appear in a number of places.
Not just a transition. Yeah, okay, the next one is efficient transit-oriented development, that sort of promote the development that advances climate planning, resilience and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And then waste management, reduce waste generation and increase recycling and composting. That's a small, the thing about climate waste management is it's a small piece, but everybody does it. So it's.
And we do it all the time.
We do it all the time. So it's a very small piece of all of our.
But it's got other issues as well that may not be planned.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, dump
Whatever else.
Yeah,
We probably have,
Yeah.
finish.
I'm stuck.
We
Yeah.
probably have time to reflect on this together for a few minutes anyway, before we move on.
And the document that's on the website,
That's true.
there are a number
I think
of
so.
edits that were suggested over the last couple of days that have not yet been integrated. I believe that process, and Mark can let us know, I think they were planning to finish up by Friday. I think they have to submit to Commerce on the 9th, so everything really has to be tied up with a bow on it pretty soon.
But June
Yeah.
and July are big time opportunities for more input into this,
Yeah.
either us as individuals, or it sounds like as our two groups who will have the opportunity.
Yeah.
Wanna,
Will just be
Cool,
a
thank you.
kind of a final starting point with the June submittal.
The end of the beginning.
Yeah.
From starting final point.
End of phase, yeah, end of phase one.
End of phase one.
Yeah.
So,
Any other reflections that we need to think about or questions?
I'm surprised there wasn't more about trees for sequestration. And more focus on the canopy, Lake Forest Park.
yes, I think there were some points where trees might have, our community forest might have been called out as in jeopardy too. More specifically. And
As
with,
far as cooling.
as far as,
Sequestration. Maybe even as far as, non-motor transportation, or I guess that's not the right word anymore. For bikes and walking, that they can be useful in planning or designing those things.
right, and I was just thinking too, and adding to that, I think the potential hazard for our forest could be called out more, as you got into some of those terrible scenarios or.
Tell me what you mean by hazards.
I think it's just the idea that we know that our community forest is gonna change over the next 50 years or 100 years, given higher temperatures and given drought conditions.
Yeah.
So, our existing forest we can expect it to change, and it might not necessarily be natural smooth change. It's probably something that we can anticipate and try to help.
Like a maintenance issue.
Yeah, I guess, like we're gonna get in, we're gonna touch on it a little bit later about the tree list that we've been working on as a tree board. We now call out in there some of the trees that are more likely to be drought resistant in the future, for example, but thinking of how things like that will change over time. Trees that are recommended now might not be recommended for planting in 25 years.
Ensuring the tree policy factors in long-term.
Yeah.
Of impacts of climate change on our urban forests and like what will thrive here in 30 years, if you're going by a 30-year canopy assessment for replanting. Is it actually going to be viable in this area in 30 years? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, I was just saying that's another change that we can expect in the future.
And another issue that could come up is urban wildfire. We got patches of forest all over the city. The dry year, they'll push burn and it burn out.
We do address that in the smoke and fire section. But
At a policy level.
But on a policy level, the question I had is that maybe some of these issues are addressed to other places in the comp plan already. Is that?
That, there is a lot of
Yeah.
things that are addressed in land use and in the environmental quality section for sure. That was the question I had, was just how do you tie all those things together, because those are clearly there's clearly
Right.
climate related things. Like the conservation residential, I think that's a zone. That
Yeah.
wasn't mentioned here, but that could be really applicable from a climate standpoint.
Well, there was some places where there was a notion that things should be in two places.
Yeah.
Because somebody who was interested in something would only read one section.
Yeah.
And there was talk about that for one specific thing, but that might be another.
Well, I think it's a really good point. At no point here, when we're talking about greenhouse gases, we're talking about reducing emissions. We're not talking about storing carbon in alternate salts.
Yeah.
We have no discussion of alternate carbon salts in this. So,
And that I think is based on the requirement is greenhouse gas emissions reduction is the
Yeah.
required sub-element.
Yeah.
It's
So-
kind of addressed in goal CE2, right? And 2.1, prioritizing,
Increased tree canopy.
yes, exactly, or just investments such as increased tree canopy retention, green infrastructure.
Is that for carbon reduction or is that for
No, that's for
But
resiliency,
it doesn't call out carbon reduction.
it doesn't call out carbon
sequestration.
sequestration
Yeah, yeah.
as a beneficial aspect. of it.
Exactly, but
Mm.
if we were gonna
It's
put it in here,
discussed, but yeah, if it were anywhere, it would be included in that section.
yeah,
That's tough because it's a policy document, but you want to be able to use it. So the council can use it
Yep.
to say, we're doing this. We're taking this action, we're creating this ordinance, whatever, because it's very clear in the comp plan that you can do this. So that's why, I would say that, there's feedback about the town center. I mean, if that is, the elephant in the park, the policies, reading it could be for any city.
They could be tucked into 2.2 very easily.
There's not a lot that makes it specific to Lake Forest Park. So just start to think about it.
So what you're saying is, it'd be nice if this were a document that the city council could use to implement changes that may not be specified in here, but would come under its umbrella,
Yeah, I think if it's important that,
reducing heat island, for example.
Right.
Were something that were clearly a goal of this. That would give the council ammunition for making moves to do that.
is that best addressed under environmental justice or maybe one of the other sections?
Yeah, that seemed a little out of place to me too.
If we're gonna add something
It's
big
really
about.
well under 2.2 there.
Is
You
that-
literally just add the words, support equitable monitoring urban forestry's climate impacts, including carbon sequestration. Focusing on high risk and underserved areas.
But it's not,
Well,
equitable monitoring is not really the issue.
But
Protected
protect
by-
heritage trees, expand canopy cover,
improve carbon sequestration and partner with King County's heat mapping.
In the beginning of that, under the goal and in the big font, it says advance environmental justice, community well-being. We add the phrase advance community justice, community well-being and ecological services
Yeah.
by prioritizing blah, blah, blah.
I think that remains for us, for you or our committees to suggest, so Brad, hang on to that.
The environmental justice isn't necessarily like.
Well,
So these are great examples of the sorts of edits that we'll be able to
Yeah.
implement. So what I'm urging is everybody just take notes. Please take notes.
And specifically 2.2 is one that we recommended rewording, the one that was about equitable monitoring. We specifically said last night, like, this is not clear
Yeah.
what actions you expect under this. So that is one that it sounded like, Mark, you'll send out once the draft for commerce is finalized, you can send it to us for review so we can discuss the next iteration after this one. Is that correct?
Yeah, at every point that we have a new version, it'll be distributed, including the website.
Great. So when we get to our July meetings and get into like, how do we get heat islands? Where do we recommend they put that in and what's the wording? We should have some updated wording on 2.2 that
Yep.
may make a more natural place to fit some of this in, or at least clarify what's already there so we can figure out if there's something missing.
any other comments or reflections on this material before we move on?
Is there any linking of parts just by saying refer to this, whatever it is that would relate to that? So that if there is something that really should be two different places, in the place where it isn't, you can have a reference to that. So
No, if you feel it really should be in a second place, let's identify it, and make sure it's there. Because really what happens, and Mark pointed this out in the meeting, is if he's talking with somebody about, multifamily housing, there's stuff that has to be there. Even if it also naturally occurs in other places in the document. It still has to be in the multifamily housing discussion because that's what he's gonna open up to go through to discuss those topics. So if something naturally should be in two places, it's okay to be a little redundant. Because that way, when you go to refer to it, it's there. For our management purposes, the less we do that, the better, because if something is in two places, there's always the risk that in a future edit, it gets changed in one place and not the other, and that gets awkward.
But that's why it might be nice to have, bridges that connect these things too, because it could be that it belongs in two places,
So it
but
does-
it's slightly different.
See section whatever,
Yeah.
see volume 1, section whatever.
Yeah, or even say for
Crossroads.
aspects of
Well,
wildlife, see blah, 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 or
I
whatever.
think we're
if
getting at a
it's-
kind of deep level here in terms of working this material, folks. Off the top of my head, it seems like there may be some places where it would be appropriate and other places where you want to repeat it. Depending on the severity of the nature of the thing. I think we need to move on. We're ready to do that. It looks like we all have more work to do on this in the next couple of months.
We're trying to finish by 8:30.
Yes, that's our goal. And what would be our policy to turn to Drew at this point, I think. Thank you all for that information, for going over that with us. And since your last meeting last night. Wow.
Like Sarah said, we
Congratulations on
didn't
your
even
work.
properly celebrate.
Well, have to do that sometime. So we have now, Drew Epping is going to, our city arborist is going to report on the public benefit rating system.
Yeah, this has been something I've been meaning to talk to you guys for a while. Some of you may be familiar with it already. I don't think everybody is. We just had one go to city council. And they expect to see a couple more come in. So it's kind of relevant. And I think that, we're always looking for ways to get people to look at their trees as an asset and not a liability or something, they need to be taken care of. So I think the public benefit rating system is another great tool that we can use when we're connecting with people who live in Lake Forest Park at, when we're tabling at events or other things, ways that they can help see the benefit in the trees that are on their property. So it's an incentive program through the county to preserve vegetative areas on private property by providing a tax reduction on assessed land value. So like, why do we want people to participate? Puts urban forest land into a protected kind of conservation type status. You can pull it out, but you have to pay back the last 7 years of that savings. And so it just kind of puts things in a bit more protected area. And like we said, gets people to view trees as benefits more, and trees are just critical green infrastructure that really impact climate vulnerability in the city. So this is another tool that we can use to promote climate resiliency as well. That tied in. All right, so it's a reduction in property taxes. As we said, it's based on a point system. Points are assigned to each qualifying resource. Basically, it depends on the quality and the size of the area you have and a few other things. And then these points are broken up. But the minimum amount you'd save is 50%. And it goes up to a 90% reduction in assessed land for the portion of the property participating. And so the kinds we'd probably see in Lake Forest Park and small areas are urban open space, which the minimum designation is about 1 acre, but can go down to as little as half an acre if it meets certain criteria. So this isn't something where you need to have 5-10 acres of property. You can have as little as a half an acre if you qualify for the urban open space designation. Forest land does need to have a minimum of 4 acres, and they have a little bit different requirements. This is a map from King County, which I've linked here, and I can send this. This is the current map that they have. It's not super updated with the latest ones, but of everyone in Lake Forest Park that's currently participating in this program. So you can kind of see we've got a group up there in the left, and I think some of them banded together too. You can be multiple owners of properties that are next to each other and combine for this benefit as well. And then we've got some individual properties. All the lower ones are under 1 acre. So they are utilizing that urban forestry space, tax saving program right now. And so it'd be awesome, if we can see some more of this where it makes sense on properties. And this is an example of the tax record of someone in Lake Forest Park utilizing this program right now. So if you look on the left, 117,000, that's the appraised value of their land. And this is for a 2.6 acre property where 2.55 of it is in the PBRS system. So the other parts where their house is, so the whole property. But they are getting a 70% land value reduction. And so their taxable land value is only 36,600 comparatively. So you can see how different that is, So they, with their point system, that's, point. Here, they earned enough points with the quality and what they're doing with it and everything to get 16 to 20 points in the rating system. So they got a 70% reduction. That's how that kind of works. So again, it starts at 50% tax reduction and goes up to 90, depending on size, quality, what criteria you fit. So this is something where I'm kind of putting together a little 1-pager explaining this, and then, thought that could be something we could be distributing more. We could write a little article about it, or something to get people thinking about their trees and the benefits of the city in a different way. So that's like a very just like broad overview. I just didn't want to take too much time on this tonight, but if you have any like high level questions about it or anything, like happy to chat for a minute about it.
I think it's great. I mean, I bet so many people say, hey, I take care of all these trees, how do I get some kind of break?
Yeah.
Just give me a little help.
Totally, yeah, and like definitely looking at some other potential options. Been talking with people at the county, about how we can maybe expand this program long term to address like if you have an exceptional tree on your property, like trying to do this for small urban trees. Those are like longer, more in-depth conversations. But I think people are excited about using this more and then finding other ways to just like provide support for people who are taking care of trees.
Has this system, been updated in the last 10 years or so, or you give me a sense of that?
On Kitsap, before this in a different county, and so we had a similar benefit program, but it was different than the King County one. So this is a county, King County program.
I had a group of people together in somebody's living room 20 years ago to hear the fellow at King County who ran this program. And then, none of them, it turned out to, it didn't really pan out a whole lot for any of them, and then nothing really came of that. And I wonder if it's a more interesting system nowadays.
Yeah, I know they did a big change to it to add some new categories and kind of rearrange things, maybe in the past 5 years or so. But yeah, I wasn't in this county working at the time, so not completely positive. But where I was on Bainbridge, we obviously had a lot of people using Forest Lane one that had market personals.
It has a terrible title. I mean, it doesn't imply the title
The
itself,
PGRS,
it's
yeah.
like, what? From a marketing perspective, no wonder people are cool about it.
Yeah, this is the first time I ever heard about it.
Yeah,
Our
me
property
too.
would
Really?
easily qualify.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, yeah. But yeah, and so, like I said, we just had one go through, so we're kind of familiar with the process now, but the county has to, like, you have to go through with them and approve it, and then after that, it comes through to Lake Forest Park as well, and goes to city council. So,
Doug had a question, right?
Well, I'm just saying, it's really a strange thing to call urban open land, which really applies to a yard too. I mean,
There's-
I know it says it has to be trees, but open space is open space.
yeah, there's, they list the kind of the
Careful definition.
criteria about what type of vegetation or what, like the status of it is, and so. Yeah, I think they're just trying to make it more accessible for people that live exactly like us, like you're in an urban growth, designated urban growth area, that's one of the criteria, which we are, and then. How can we value these smaller parcels of land that are really impacting the canopy of these areas?
But it does have to be forest land, it can't actually be open.
Native vegetation, and so it's a little broad there. Again, it can be a variety of different things. So there's larger criteria, but I thought these were the two we'd probably focus on. Because if you get people kind of banding together, you can probably hit that forest land, then as individual properties can probably hit the urban open space. So if we just focus on a few categories we think are most relevant for the city, I think we could communicate like the requirements or who's eligible pretty well for those.
Very cool.
But the properties have to be adjacent.
If you don't have enough on your own property to qualify for the program. Yeah, so if you got a couple people, if you have 4 1-acre properties or something and you're trying to get to the 4-acre for forest land, then you need to join forces. But if you're one property that's over a ½ acre and you're looking to do the urban open space designation, that can just be you don't have to.
But you can get together with like neighbors that are spread around.
Yeah, or adjacent to the property or
They do have to be adjacent.
They do
correct?
have to.
Yeah.
Contiguous.
Yeah,
And,
so if you're as little as ½ of an acre, they want you to, I know this is really small, it's just my notes in here. Be near a stream or water or scenic resource, or even if you have land that's shielding from the road, visual quality along like highways and other roads. So there's like some really interesting criteria you could meet.
I wonder other critical areas like steep slopes.
Soils is another thing that's
Soil-
eligible under the
soil
protected, so
conservation.
that'd be something you probably have to ask, one of the people associated with the program, what exactly maybe that means. There is some stuff here, it's already a protected area under other parts of the code, it may not qualify, so if you've got like wetland or something like that, it's already protected under a different type of
That's why I
thing.
mentioned steep slopes, I thought that might also come in that category.
That I think is a little less
Yeah.
specific.
How is this different from the conservation easement? Or is it the same thing?
I don't know. They could be different parts of the same program. These are the two I just highlighted, urban open space and forest land. So I don't know, conservation easement is another category because they do have about like 10 to 15 categories maybe, potentially, but
You also have lower category.
yeah. Conservation easements, yeah, and designated open space, it's really set, and usually those are more utilized by like larger developments or just larger property owners, so yeah, these ones I was kind of looking at. What could be relevant to maybe smaller ones, but yeah, not sure, or conservationism could be one of the terms they used to call it, now they're calling it something else potentially, or I'm not sure.
Did that motivate shading parking lots?
I don't know if anything
Is
around
it good for
Sept
your
would call that
commercial?
I think
urban
a
open space.
conservation easement is an ownership interest, right, by the county. It's not at all.
I mean,
Not
personal
positive.
ownership rather than. Commercial based.
Or just a directive, right, like. They would.
Well, I'm saying if like the town.
You mean it might not have a tax benefit
Right, exactly. It's.
under some circumstances? I thought it did too.
Dyer decided that they wanted to. Forest the parking lots in a way that would cover more. Certain amount,
Well,
would
you
they
put
get a
easement-
tax break?
No, I think if you put an easement on your conservation easement on your property and you go and sell the property, the county has an ownership interest in preserving the conservation
You can't,
designation.
you can't undo
Right,
conservation.
exactly.
This you can undo.
Yes, yeah,
That-
that's a great point, thank you.
Oh, maybe so.
Okay,
Yes.
we got it clear.
Larry,
Comment and a question. So the comment, the contiguous multiple owners, it's not just an option, it's incentivized, you get bonus points for that. Which means potentially a bigger property tax discount if you team up with your neighbors. And then a question for you, Drew.
Yeah.
Your map was only north of town center, is anybody south of town center doing this?
No one was, that was the map I included encompassed everybody that's currently.
I suspect it'd be challenging because the parcels south of town center tend to be small, just maybe one of them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So potentially some opportunities if they can team up.
yeah, there was none south, but like I said, some of these are. Of course, not speak.
I'm kind of interested in finding out who those people north are who are working
Grouped
together.
together, yeah. Yeah, it seems like these three probably grouped together, and again, they're abutting a stream. It kind of gives you a little more information, so. This map and the scroll pad don't work together. But,
That's
yeah,
up just before the county line where that steep hillside above the, you know,
Looked like it was on 40th Place.
40th place, right up by the county line where that steep hillside comes down. North of 196, so it's a,
yeah, it gives you like, tells you which of the categories they kind of hit in here, so continuous parcels under separate ownership. Public lands and right of way buffer, scenic resource, viewpoint, view corridor. Significant wildlife, or salmon wildlife and urban space, so, those are kind of the things they got points for.
So the property tax includes a lot of different funding mechanisms within it. And so are those negatively affected proportionately? When a property tax is reduced, for example?
I mean, I think everything goes through the county and then filters down to us, so I think it's probably, just kind of getting taken out of that, but that is why like the county approves it and then it has to go to the city to also approve because there is, the impact on.
I think we're ready to move on. If there's something else, Drew, or any other burning question people would like to raise? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
The one last thing I want to show you is town center. Oh, this is kind of sad. As if you click on the 1936, you'll see it was the most forested area in the world.
Yeah,
And kind of did a 180 from that to
and the stream ran right through the middle of it.
yeah, just kind of nuts to see that go that. One other thing I found out, I've been kind of looking into that area because of all the talk about, these are non-treat areas right now. Is that someplace we could just put trees, or something? This is also a Superfund site through Department of Ecology because of the 2 laundry cleaners that were in the area. So there are some, concerns.
Capping system.
I don't think it's capping there. I can send over the Department of Ecology, page with all the documents on it. They are doing like a activated charcoal filter to kind of catch stuff, and so it's not capping. They're working.
Looks like a well as you exiting the town center.
off
Yeah.
to the south.
I don't know.
But that
I
could be
think both
potentially
sides.
why they didn't
Yeah,
have
both
trees
sides.
in that area as part of
Painted with.
the original thing, if they were worried about them pulling up contaminants, like unintentional fire remediation or.
Can you go back to
Fire
that slide?
remediation, it's a thing.
Yeah,
The present one?
Hmm?
Can you go back to the present slide?
for the PDRs.
Sure, up there.
The map.
Oh, yeah.
that you had up.
Yeah.
The map?
It's not terribly important. As I was walking in today, I was looking around the parking lot. There's actually a lot of places you can plant trees that are just shrubs now. And you don't have to actually to get rid of parking places. Just plant trees where there's shrubs.
Yeah,
30 trees with
I was doing the same thing on my walk. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
see
none
all
right
everything.
here right now. But
Lot
this
that's
is,
right out here though, which is the city owns,
Right.
is one of the biggest places. And that, is a potential proof of concept place where maybe we could get the city to move on it.
yeah, I think we just would have to look at the code parking lot minimums, and see, if we can depave any of that area or if that's gonna interfere with what the code requires the parking.
So is that red line outline the city's portion of the parking lot?
Yes.
Not that big.
Yeah, I guess my point, you don't even have to be talking about giving up parking spaces. You could just plant
Yeah.
trees where there's already a little bit of dirt.
Right. And it's not only parking places that retailers tend to be concerned about, it's advertising views. Which they still think, there's some re-education there. Are we ready to move on, folks?
Yep.
We're coming to the interesting part of this meeting, well, The next interesting part of this meeting, the part which is changing of gears, right? Where we're gonna talk about, instead of policy stuff, we're gonna talk about just some very specific things that each group wants to update themselves on in terms of kind of individual group meeting, but opportunity to learn what each group is doing.
I seem not to be able to get mine up
You want to see your list or you take notes or
there. Try again.
starting with the climate action.
Share. This.
I could share general screen sharing instead of the individual window, because it was
Come over
doing
here,
that,
tell
yeah,
me.
just it was doing the same thing.
And we agreed we could do this in a minute and a half apiece.
I
right?
know, and I'm wasting my
This
time.
doesn't count towards your time.
Okay.
Okay, that takes care of the first item.
I don't
The second-
share, I
Okay.
don't share this.
Share that,
This.
but I'm gonna click this instead. It was in PowerPoint.
Mhm.
Huh.
Oh, you had some things I want to share.
So there it is. Oh, great.
So you should be good then.
Okay, tree board, no, not the tree board. Okay, we're gonna go, we just wanted to share a couple of things that the city has done in terms of, traffic reduction. And this is a healthy streets program, and there is one in Seattle already. And this is an example from Seattle, and it's like the GO Trail, it's just like the GO Trail, it's limit access. Emergency vehicles, all your guests can come in, fire trucks can come in, but the speed is reduced. And the city has a program, but they don't have any implementation yet. But Mark and I are working with our neighborhood to do the first step, which is to petition 75% of the people on the street to close it. And our street is here, but we're not gonna do the whole street. Our street, the 185th turns into 26, so we're just doing.
What are the green lines?
Those are the ones that the streets that are eligible for healthy streets, according to the city council.
We get a tax break for that?
No, but you can walk in your street. Makes your street.
We can do that anyway, we got a dead end street,
Oh,
and we're marked there as an eligible one, so.
Well, it can be easy for you.
but so it's just one more way, because the climate action committee thinks that if you walk more. Okay, the other thing is that we've been partnering with Kenmore on a variety of things. The one that we did was, are you ready for fire season? And we did that before fire season and nobody came, but not nobody, there were 10 of us. But it was a very interesting program. Probably should do it again. And we're doing another one called what can I do with this? And because Lake Forest Park and Shoreline are both served by Republic Services, so you can actually bring things and say, what kind of recycle this? They're also giving away, this one is in Kenmore, it's at the Kenmore City Hall. They're gonna have a drawing for a Lomi food dehydrator. The other thing this is very tangential, but Octavia Butler is lived in Lake Forest Park the last 10 years of her life, and she was a futurist, and a lot of the things that she talked about are coming true right now, and there are a lot of people in town who are very interested in her, and there are two things going on. One is on the 23rd of June, which is a video interview of Octavia Butler in her home. And then a discussion to follow. A couple of people who have been working on this are doing that. And then it turned out that as we began to talk about it, there's a brand new book coming out, a biography of Octavia Butler, and the only place the author is coming is here, because we said you should come here because we're Octavia Butler fans. No, because she lived here and there's a group of people who are interested in this. City's gonna do a proclamation to talk about it, but it's again, there's a whole group of people who are interested in futures, and it's an important piece of it.
Where can we find event details for the 23rd?
Climate hub.
Yeah, we'll post it on the content, but it starts at 7 o'clock.
At the
At the Commons.
Commons, okay.
Both of these are at the Commons. Okay. And the Climate Action Book Club is reading.
So don't burst into tears.
No. What? No, yeah. We have a date, this is just for the Climate Action Committee, we have a date set for September 14th, and we don't have staffing for it yet. But the other thing that I wanted to bring to my colleagues at the tree board is Republic Services offered us another day, which we wouldn't have to pay for, and if we wanted to collaborate on a day to be at the climate, to be together on presenting this public benefit rating system or whatever, we could do that together if you were interested in that. We'd have to find a date and, but if that was something that was
So
interesting.
is an offer there to us, tree board to do something?
No, it was an offer to the Climate Action Committee, who is extending the offer to the tree board.
We did this a few years ago, and I thought it was a great,
We've been out talking, and it's a great opportunity.
one of
to
the
get
things we did was we got a couple hundred. Douglas fir seedlings from a state nursery.
Yeah.
And just gave them out to anybody who stopped by in Waterville.
Yeah.
And
I
how
got
many of
one in
those are
my
still alive?
backyard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, good.
Yeah.
That's not September 14th. That's another date to be
It
determined.
would be another day, so if maybe you could authorize Mark and I. Yeah,
Towards the end of the farmer's market, some of the more of the booths become vacant because some of the vendors stop showing up at the end of the
We were
season.
taking over the Republic Service.
We're,
table.
yeah, so the Republic is a sponsor, and as a sponsor, you get a table, and they didn't want it. So they said, did we want their table? And they didn't want staff on Sunday.
I approve you and Mark on behalf of the tree board to figure that out.
Hey,
Okay.
we're not making decisions tonight, are we? We're gonna talk on the agenda for July 2nd.
Need to staff a table, I have
Well,
a couple weekends.
We
that
have
are off.
we have good capability
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do that, so I think.
It's nice for people to see two things coordinating to
Yeah.
two groups. Interact.
Okay, thank you.
The other is I'm gonna have Dana talk about the climate hub. Read the agenda, I see.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so this is the Climate Hub and it is, so it's a space in the Commons on the second floor, right behind the third place bookstore. That, you can have your picture taken after this meeting if you would like to with the Climate Hub frame. But, it's meant to be a community resource for people to learn about how climate affects us in our local area, what we can do about it, volunteer opportunities, ways that we can talk about what's going on there and connect people. So we made a attractive mural to attract people using the incredible resources that we have in the city. And we got two artists, very talented artists, to help us design.
Kill the owl.
No, I don't.
Oh yeah, and there's an owl, so you're just gonna have to go and see
It's
it if you
gonna happen,
haven't
yeah.
yet. There's an incredibly gorgeous owl just to the left. That white side on the left. But this is a growing resource that we have all sorts of ideas on how to make it reach even more people and do more. Are we supposed to talk also about the grant? I'm gonna have to watch those. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, but
Great.
we are growing this idea and we would love to include, say, students in the local schools, getting them involved with, having people in there to talk to the public as the public's walking by, having hands-on exhibit kinds of things that can reach people and
You
really
have a
connect with
scientist.
people.
You have a scientist working with you.
That's next.
Each.
Oh, that's next. Well, I am a scientist.
Oh, yeah. But you haven't.
I have a lot of science.
You're jumping ahead,
Yeah, yeah, and we have a scientist, so that's the next
That's
part.
Mimi. Sorry.
Well, you
Mural
know
is
more than
gorgeous.
okay, so. Our next phase of this project is that we, because of Mimi, we're able to identify a really unusual and interesting grant that we received through the American. Yeah, I always get that one mixed up. This grant is not for money, it's for expertise. So we have a scientist who is going to find us more scientists to work with us on building a map of Lake Forest Park especially, but it can also, go out to local areas around and map using GIS important features, data, things that the public can then delve into. The Climate Hub has a space for advertising sort of what's going on in 3-month intervals and what the tree board, for example, is doing, or what the stewardship is doing. And this grant would allow us to put in a touchscreen, large touchscreen with this mapping infrastructure so that we could have people just, able to dig in and learn about the environment that they live in and what's being done in that environment. So this is a 1-year grant. So we're hoping to get this all put together and fundraise a touchscreen for the area in Climate Hub there available.
There are quite a lot of maps available online showing a lot of these things, the natural areas and critical areas and things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's that, and there's also a lot of data that's being collected in the area. So Brookside School, for example, has been collecting temperature data for a long time in their own weather station.
A
Having
lot
that
of
data
data,
there.
stream water quality data.
Stream
that
water
could
quality.
be made available.
Yeah. There's all these little things that are out there, but people don't really know that they are even there, let alone how to get a hold into them.
Great.
The last thing is, I just want to say that we have a student who's gonna be interviewed for our climate committee on the 12th, and she has friends, so we're trying to talk to her about bringing to various, and she's a freshman now, so she's a first year student, so if she has she could have a history with us.
She's a short.
Yeah, she's a short crest.
So the tree board had a couple of items too that we want to just mainly talk amongst ourselves, but also let you know some of the things we're working on. And these are just 4 that are tough that I think were timely. There may be anything I missed there too, but so one is a 5 Acre Woods improvement project, specifically to remove some a small grove of black locust trees. And Richard's been taking the lead for us on that, and just wondered if there's
He's
anything.
been spinning his wheels, but the idea I had was then that was at the northeast corner of the 5 Acre Woods. It is completely overgrown with invasive species. The black locust is probably the worst, but there's laurel cherry, there's holly, there's all sorts of stuff in there. From the street to the property line of that parcel that is going to be given to the city, and up to about where the trail comes around, if you are familiar with the trail system in there, the easternmost trail, to the point where the hill drops down towards the creek. That upper part is would be a really nice project area if you go in and get out all the invasives and plant with native trees. It would require the trees that are in there now, some of those black locusts are big. This is not the sort of thing that volunteers could go in and have things out and replant. It would require having a budget going for hiring a tree removal company to come in and take out some of those trees. And then the replanting and so on, that could also be done commercially, but the Stewardship Foundation has been doing a really good job of doing revegetation in there. If we had the funds to buy those plants to go in, we could perhaps do that portion of it voluntarily, but it would be a really nice concise project that would be fit with our goals of planting trees and eliminating invasive species.
Are you partnering with the stewardship?
So I've been
Foundation
talking
for
to
the-
people at Stewardship Foundation, Parks Board, and the Tree Board.
And where would the budget come?
Well, the Stewardship Foundation said they could probably put some money up. And I think there are some funding opportunities. Drew had some suggestions. When we talked
Yeah,
about
we
this
can look at a few
while ago.
things. We have money in our tree fund, some things through cases sometimes, we can look at, and just talk to Forward Parks.
So it would require developing a plan, seeking funding. And then implementing it.
Okay, and we'll be taking this up, but these items will probably be on our July 2nd agenda as well, so we can push with it, but just
I would
check
really
it.
like to get out there with 1 or 2 members from the tree board and just look at the project area, so we just kind of know
Yeah,
what the,
Let's do that.
okay,
I
yeah.
think it's actually the south, the
The
southeast corner, I think,
Yes.
quadrant of the property. Yeah,
Richard, tomorrow we'll talk.
so Drew, the next item is back to you. You've been, I know, doing some research into options that may be available, learning how other communities have done their community forest management plan, which is a document of the cities in which we have put on our work plan to at least get started on updating it. It hasn't been updated in at least 15 years, so.
Yes, so I was able to get. Good share my screen. Some information from the city of Bothell about. How much their costs were. Did we go over this at the last one, or did I just share it with
You sent it out, I saw it, but
everybody? Okay, so. I have a few grant updates with that too, which are all good news, which was awesome. So maybe I'll start with that. Okay, so for the grant wise, I heard back from KCD, who originally was going to help us out with some canopy assessment planning, then said, oh, we can't do it for you now. Now they're back saying, if we want to pay $4,000, that we can now get canopy assessment stuff through Planet Geo. They'll give us our shape files afterwards as well. And the data will be from the 2023 layers if we do that option. So that is way cheaper than we're gonna get it anywhere else.
Yeah.
So that's kind of up to you guys about if you feel like having 2023 data is recent enough, for us.
The data is, that's the last flight.
Yeah, so
They only fly it every 5 years.
I don't know, they have 2024s for some cities. I don't know what.
you think the quality of the information would be as high as it has been in the past when we've done that?
Yeah, Planet Geo is a software company that does inventorying and canopy data. I actually think it's their best thing they do. So, if we get it from Planet Geo and based on what they did for Bothell, I can send a link if you guys want to look at it and see if you feel like that's up to, what we want. But it does break it down parcel by parcel canopy coverage. And even has canopy coverages for individual parcels on there, which is just kind of helpful to look at for a lot of our code stuff too, for you and to know where you're at.
Oh, yeah.
They did changes to where they showed where it was 10 years ago versus now, and you can filter between the two and see where you're losing the most. And so we also get to be a part of those conversations if we do it with them, of saying what we want shown on that.
Anything we need to do before July 2nd, we take it up then, we can.
Assuming they need an answer on it,
Uh,
or it's just
they don't-
open-ended offer
Kind of open-ended, we're giving them money, so I mean, they're just hoping.
Is it
until they revoke the offer again.
Is it our money that we've,
It would be KCD funds. So it's money that KCD has in the member jurisdiction grants. I've kind of lightly talked to Corey about it because she just I haven't really talked to Mark about it yet because this is very new news and I haven't seen him, but it's such a low amount. I think there's 135,000 in there right now. We're asking for 4 of it that.
really?
It's not a big ask comparatively to a lot of things. Like KCD did ask us to use those grants for that. I think to streamline, just being able to.
Thank you. Did you have more to report?
Yeah,
That
also
would
got
be cheap,
news.
3 times the price, by the way, that's a fabulous price.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it costs to get the thing done, but I'm sure it was 4 digits, it was 5.
Sure.
Yeah,
It flies, I suspect.
it's because they already have it sitting there and we're just paying for, access.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's a deal.
Oh, pay, yeah, I was expecting them to come back with a much higher number, so when I heard that today, I was like, oh, gotta tell them.
They're making sure.
So that's great, and
They
then.
up on it before they realize they've left on 0.
Yeah. And then our other grant, the SFI grant, which would allow us to do some benchmarking and gap analysis for the tree plan, did come back that's unfrozen now. They are proceeding.
Oh,
So if we want that, that's $70,000, and I would need to go to council, we need to talk through there, but that's a lot of money and it's very ambiguous what we can use it for, so I think we could use a decent chunk of that for planning activities related to this if we wanted to narrow the scope down.
Again, is there anything we need? That sounds tremendous. Is there anything we need to do before July 2nd?
Nope, just
Yeah.
updating you guys that,
Move that
that
along.
there's money coming in for once.
So we gotta think about that on July 2nd, figure that out, how much of
Yeah.
that could go towards the actual plan that we want to develop.
Yeah, so I'll send just a little wrap up of those details to everybody, so you guys can marinate on it, you know, in the scope for Butler. I think I sent it to a few people, just make sure everybody has it, and so you kind of think about it before.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The Climate Action Committee is incredibly jealous that you have staff that go find and get contracts, and that's what we want.
We're wondering if we can usurp you to be the climate manager.
That you make
as well.
changes if you have staff people.
Trees are special.
Oh, trees are special.
Coordinator now, the three of us.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
that's what we.
Power to you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, just,
I had a moment.
It was nice after a lot of just the doom and uncertainty with a lot of the grants to come back and, you know, hear these some
Yeah,
positive.
we've been, okay. Thank you, Drew.
Mark, maybe we should change our name to Tree Action.
Yes.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. And or.
Well, I think the next item maybe is yours, Doug. Okay,
Drew again.
Drew again, right? So we got several things, tree-related code amendments that we are planning to, and ready to take to the council. And this item is called we just call it housekeeping items because it was a lot of smaller order stuff that we wanted to take care of. And I think we haven't, I think maybe, what do you think about that, Drew? Or where are we on that?
That with that, we just gotta push that off for now, so we don't have 2 code updates going simultaneously. And met with legal today, me, Mark, and Ken met to look over our exceptional tree code changes. So that's like the
That's
one
right.
meaty
That's right.
one we're dealing with now, and kind of wanted to leave that as more of a single issue, and then the tree list, you know, being the other item with
We
that.
talked about that at the last meeting, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, and then I think pushing housekeeping till we're done, so we're not having, because it's gonna require multiple council touches for this, you know, tree code update, to not be working on 2 code updates at the same time, and that way we have a time to see how the middle housing bill is affecting Lake Forest Park, and see if there's any changes we need to make related to that. That, you know, of just how things are flowing with those changes or whatnot, that we would potentially bash with housekeeping.
So let's move into that next item and then wrap that up. And this is, so we need to, this is the items that we are ready to, Drew mentioned, we are ready to take to the council. There's 2 of them. There's an updated master tree list for the city. And there's an exceptional amendments to our code regarding exceptional trees or very large trees. And you might as well go ahead and say that. My main point is here, I guess the main thing I wanted, if there's any clarity on when the council would like to hear that.
So we were waiting to get, see if we can get on the schedule until Kim had a chance to look at it, because she's helping us draft the ordinance and just looking over things, so I'm waiting on her edits now. She was really booked up looking at other stuff, so today was the first day we could get in since we last, you know, voted and checked on everything with her, but she was very receptive and thought everything looked pretty good. There's a little bit Doug and I are gonna have to do to just revise the memo. To just be a little more strategic there, but otherwise it's very minor, like little language things. She really likes the planning concession setback stuff that we had, just showing again that, like, you know, we're trying to work with people to give them property rights while protecting trees. So yeah,
Isn't that just part of the housekeeping issues, though? Or is that gonna be part of this?
no, that's part of this,
Oh.
that's in the exceptional tree code that we're adding in, so. Yeah, so like that was good, yeah, it was pretty good, it was just a little minor tweaks of hers and then.
So the new thing, one of the new things about the tree list is that for the first time, it'll have a section on trees that are not allowed to be planted in Lake Forest Park,
Mhm.
which would be a big step for the council to consider that. And
No, they're not allowed, it's not that they're not allowed to be planted. They don't count as replacement trees.
yeah, that's,
They
they
can't be
can't
planted
be
in-
planted as replacement.
And they can't be planted in planting.
You're not gonna rule out Leland cedar.
What?
No,
I would love it if you could say that Leland cedar cannot be
they're
planted.
just in the wrong spot a lot of times, you know, we just gotta.
5 feet in my foundation.
The other thing about the exceptional trees, and I saw you referencing in your material to heritage trees. What suggestion I might have, and we might discuss, but you might want to consider that word. The consultants might want to, instead of having heritage trees, which has always been a slippery category
Well,
for
there
us.
was a thing called heritage tree.
There was, and
That
go to look
long
at,
since been sort of dormant, and I think
Yeah,
it was never had any utility.
so you might, in terms of heritage, instead of heritage trees, large trees might be better, or even exceptional trees if you wanted to.
Some
use.
wording that is
Yeah.
consistent with the ordinance.
So very large trees, exceptional trees require,
Large diameter trees.
yes, and then depending by species, what makes an exceptional tree, and requires extra step of a public hearing in order to actually remove one. So there's a little bit of an extra protection that goes with exceptional trees. Our suggestion is to reduce the size a little bit on some of those, all of those, some of those, so that so that more trees are given those protections.
So who gives the status of exception tree? You do, or just the homeowner say I have a.
The code, so there's criteria in our code, and if it's a certain size, you know, in a certain species, it just is an exceptional tree. The heritage tree program was more of a nomination process, where if you just had like a tree that was of specific. Significance in some way and age, you know, you could nominate it on your own, and then there'd be a review. I'm guessing that's how it's worked in, you know, other cities.
It was a nice idea, but really hard to make, to standardize and figure out what trees were going.
Yeah, a little more loosey goosey.
My cat really likes this tree.
The tree of a certain
Yeah,
type is a.
And the designation of exceptional tree only matters if you're trying to remove it.
Well, that's what we had to share, or to
Do you remember you
check
had
signals
that,
ourselves.
by chance to have those 3 graphs I sent you? Where you could share them today? People might be interested, this is what I suspect we're gonna be using to present it to the council.
The actual numbers that we changed.
No, some graphs I'm illustrating why,
Oh,
and I didn't even think about it until 2 minutes ago, and I realized that maybe you guys might want to see them.
we do have 8 minutes left.
Yeah, there we go.
Maybe, while you're looking for that, is there anything in the reports and announcements? Often we hear from Councilmember Goldman in our group about things that are going on. Is there anything like that we'd want to? Or anybody else that, when we have reports or announcements? Crazy?
So did you get a date on when you want to the council on the stuff?
Well, I think we're waiting to hear from council. Drew's working that, and as she said, that it needs a legal review that's still going on, I guess.
But I just need broad, it's like,
Oh.
set the agenda, June, July, August.
I think Larry had mentioned July as a possibility once before.
Yeah, that was in the context that we have to get middle housing done by the end of June.
Mhm.
And we did get the sign code updates taken care of. But once we get middle, and in addition, we're gonna be conducting interviews for, appointing a council member for position 2. Once we've gotten those off our plate, then I think we could pivot and look at tree code, so that would probably be mid-July, let's say.
I mean, even early July is fine, it's just basically not, after July 30th, our workload goes down tremendously.
At the next meeting, we could button up
Yeah.
changes from Kim, and just gonna relook at everything, and then. I can talk with Mark Hoffman about.
Yeah, so if we had July 2nd, if we had an indication when it would fit best, that'd be great. So back to this, Doug, you want to talk about it?
Stuff I put together, to try to explain for the species we had some decent data on, why we chose the numbers we chose, or what the impact of the numbers we chose is. So this shows for Douglas fir, which we have the best data on. We're currently the current limit is 42 inches. To become an exceptional tree. We're proposing cutting it back to 40 inches. It protects a few percent more trees. They're probably the most important trees in the city. So. For western red cedar. Current code only protects less than 1% of the red cedars in the city. And Drew will be able to explain at length, I think, why red cedar is so important.
Yeah, it's just the keystone species, you know, there's a lot of like local cultural importance as well. Yeah, again, just these really large native conifers are just doing so much more than a lot of the trees. So we won't think that should be more accurately reflected in here. Like Doug's saying, you know, our current 42 limits protecting 0.8% of them. So for us to go down to 30, it looks like a big number, but based on just the makeup of them in the city and the sizes these are achieving, they're not very resilient to some of these sharp changes in our climate as well. So we're just not seeing as many of them as big anymore either. So we kind of do need to lower the limit in order to save, you know, what are the city? Yeah.
Does
Did
the
you have any
height
more in
of that represent plantings that were done at particular periods or something? Why are there two peaks?
Interesting question.
Good question. It's a sampling, I mean, sampling variation probably,
Oh, yeah.
but I don't know. It's not, they're not planted. I think the great majority of red cedar, naturally grown with
So-
tree fruit.
But maybe there were times in the past where city was pushing tree planting or.
I don't think they planted red cedars though. I think they're probably things that seed themselves in naturally, like places like Dick's backyard.
These are sizes, right? Like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's not a timeline. it's
Sure.
They
Diane.
are.
Oh, that's
but
the
not
latest,
as
the latest.
early
Right.
No,
stage.
it's a good question. Why are there no, so few 10, 15 inch trees, and so many 20 to 25 inch trees? But we're talking about a total here of about 50 trees, so a couple of trees, one in one category or the other, make a big.
So this is, go ahead.
Is it all with the red cedar in Lake Forest Park? Or
Based on a sample.
Sample through the city. That's how you're.
a sample,
Yeah,
like
so-
from the air?
For context, we did a citywide tree inventory where we randomly selected plots all around the city. And then the contractor went on those plots and just counted how many trees of each species of each size. And from that sample, I think it was about 100 or so locations in the city, we are extrapolating to citywide.
This is very new, this is new charts that we haven't seen as a tree board, so thank you for, I guess this is getting ready for council, huh?
It didn't exist till after the time the tree board met.
And I think these will be great for when we go to council again to show like what was being protected, it does now,
I
showing
like
that.
using the visual.
Yeah.
Great.
You didn't have big leaf maple there, did you?
Yeah, we do have big leaf maple.
Oh, just you wait, yeah.
Yeah, so big leaf maple is a really strange distribution, so it's very hard to figure out where to put that line. But I noticed that for the other two species, and I didn't point it out at the time, the limit we had set is just about twice the mean. And so if we go big leaf maple and go twice the mean, it puts it about 30 inches. So that gives us sort of a place to put it. It protects about the same big leaf maple as the does for the other species.
And just for like the climate action people who haven't been a part of our process doing this, like these are really big limit changes, 42 to 30. 42 to 40, 42, but that's why we're highlighting them and have them pulled out. Right now, there are some that aren't changing at all on the list. Or they're staying the same and like small ones. So it really was a thoughtful process of what do we think is gonna be appropriate here, not just kind of moving them all down,
And there's also a catch-all category.
Yes, yeah, and him and I talked about that a bit today. Her concern was just kind of finding out like, what are the invasive trees, around here that would be excluded from this, just to say that we're not saying like all other trees are protected. And I was like, well, I think around here, black locust and horse chestnut are probably like the main two that we would not include under the 40% catch-all based on their status of King County.
I think there may be a language in the language that protects exceptional trees. May exclude invasive trees.
It doesn't currently,
Okay.
but it is going to with our update. Yeah. So
Okay, so we'll have more on that on July 2nd through
Yeah.
firming up what you guys are gonna
then you and
do.
I will work to get the PowerPoint.
Yes, Tracy,
Can I enter our meeting on a fun note?
please.
Some of you may have heard, over the holiday weekend, an oak tree fell in Lion National Park Reserve. I think Drew.
Oh, really?
What I think she and Rebecca inspired to be able to do was to get a slab for me. So I literally have a slab of this, what apparently is about a 68-year-old oak tree. I have a friend who specializes in preserving slabs so that, for instance, municipality schools can actually put little timeline markers on there and things like that.
Nice.
This is about the age of Lake Forest Park, quite literally. I think the tree was planted in 1957 or something like that. So it's about as close as we're gonna get just by luck to that.
Was it right down by the water?
Yeah, it was right.
I noticed it the other day. It was, how far I was leaning, yeah.
Okay, so my call to action for y'all is, I'm a relative newcomer to Lake Forest Park. I can put mayoral administrations on it. That's probably not terribly exciting for the average 8-year-old. Are there events in Lake Forest Park that we should be celebrated by having a date? Literally on
Creation
this-
of the parks. There's a bunch of parks that have been created and.
Oh, sure, I like that, sure. But I can't even find a list of something like that, so.
I've got a list
help
of
me out,
them.
that'd be super.
How big is it?
it's literally about this block and it weighs something like 40 pounds or it's massive.
But it would be great to be like in the main hall, the main lobby.
Exactly,
Cool,
exactly.
great.
What we're thinking is basically putting it in a case so that it can be transported, say, to the elementary schools, things like that.
So definitely put the elementary school bonding dates on.
Right.
And there've been a couple of expansions of the city limits, right? From
Yes.
the initial,
60 of
that many, I thought there were only
62 or something. There's a list of- Some of them were just a block or so, but others, yeah.
This
But
kind of,
so send your ideas to Tracy.
this is kind of funny, the cookie was leaning up against the public records desk, and I was like, yeah, it's just another public record, you know.
Is there any other stuff, anything else we need tonight to do? We
What
announce
happened?
it pretty quickly.
We're leaving it on site and incorporating it in the park redesign.
Nice.
Next item is next steps. We all have our next steps to do. We know that. Okay. Are we ready to leave? To adjourn this meeting? Anything else to do? I thank you all.
I move we adjourn.
Appreciated this. Thanks to hear what the climate's doing and to get that briefing on policy stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second? Doug seconds. All in favor? Thank you.
I thought that was awesome. Yeah.
What a day.